Welcome to Why Is This Good? A podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine and I'm here with John. Hey, John.
Hello.
Okay, it's your turn. Tell us about the story you picked.
I picked the story A Visit of Charity by Eudora Welty. I'm a campfire girl. I have to pay a visit to some old lady, she told the nurse at the desk. This was a woman in a white uniform who looked as if she were cold. She had close-cut hair, which stood up on the very top of her head, exactly like a sea wave. Marion, the little girl, did not tell her that this visit would give her a minimum of only 3 points in her score. Acquainted with any of our residents? Asked the nurse. She lifted one eyebrow and spoke like a man. With any old ladies? No, but that is, any of them will do, Marion stammered. With her free hand, she pushed her hair behind her ears, as she did when it was time to study science. The nurse shrugged and rose. You have a nice multiflora cineraria there, she remarked as she walked ahead down the hall of closed doors to pick out an old lady. There was loose, bulging linoleum on the floor. Marion felt as if she were walking on the waves, but the nurse paid no attention to it. There was a smell in the hall like the interior of a clock. Everything was silent until, behind one of the doors, an old lady of some kind cleared her throat like a sheep bleeding. This decided the nurse. Stopping in her tracks, she first extended her arm, bent her elbow, and leaned forward from the hips, all to examine the watch strapped to her wrist. Then she gave a loud double rap on the door. There are two in each room, the nurse remarked over her shoulder. Two what? Asked Marion without thinking. The sound, like a sheep's bleating, almost made her turn around and run back. One old woman was pulling the door open in short, gradual jerks, and when she saw the nurse, a strange smile forced her old face dangerously awry. Marion, suddenly propelled by the strong, impatient arm of the nurse, saw next the side face of another woman, even older, who was lying flat in bed with a cap on and a counterpane drawn up to her chin. Visitor, said the nurse, and after one more shove, she was off up the hall. Marion stood tongue-tied. Both hands held the potted plant. The old woman, still with that terrible square smile, which was a smile of welcome, stamped on her bony face, was waiting. Perhaps she said something. The old woman in bed said nothing at all, and she did not look around. Suddenly, Marion saw a hand, quick as a bird claw, reach up in the air and pluck the white cap off her head. At the same time, another claw to match drew her all the way into the room, and the next moment the door closed behind her. My, said the old lady at her side. Marion stood enclosed by a bed, a washstand, and a chair. The tiny room had altogether too much furniture. Everything smelled wet, even the bare floor. She held onto the back of the chair, which was wicker and felt soft and damp. Her heart beat more and more slowly, her hands got colder and colder, and she could not hear whether the old women were saying anything or not. She could not see them very clearly. How dark it was. The window shade was down, and the only door was shut. Marion looked at the ceiling. It was like being caught in a robber's cave, just before one was murdered. Did you come to be our little girl for a while? The first robber asked. Then something was snatched from Marion's hand, the little potted plant. Flowers, screamed the old woman. She stood holding the pot in an undecided way. Pretty flowers, she added. Then the old woman in bed cleared her throat and spoke. They are not pretty, she said, still without looking around, but very distinctly. Marion suddenly pitched against the chair and sat down in it.
So tell us about this story. Had you read it before or how'd you find it?
I had not read it. I was reading some other random thing and it referenced this story and it talked about a character named Marion who was a campfire girl. And my daughter's named Marion and she's a scout. And I was like, oh, I have to read that. I'm going to bring it to the podcast. And I had decided before I even looked it up, like I'll probably bring that to the podcast just for fun.
That's super cute. Yeah. I thought Campfire Girl was such a cute name because it's like, and right away that basically talking about Girl Scouts, whether or not Campfire Girls exist.
They
I'm a
do. I mean,
campfire girl. Do they?
yeah, our family, we have some history of campfire. I think Jenny's mom was a campfire girl. We have a whole handbook for campfire girls on the
Okay, cool.
bookshelf. So
That's cute.
I think Jenny wanted to be a campfire girl when she was young.
Yeah, so like right away, we know that she's in some sort of scouts thing. She says some old lady, so you know that she's just checking off this box.
Yes, she's gonna get 3 points for it.
Yeah, and then it references the points. And I remember like in Girl Scouts, like how they would outline the requirements for each of these badges. And if I was gonna like get a badge on my own, I would just look and see how hard it was.
That's right.
I'm like, how badly do I want this? Yeah, so it's funny that not only is Marion just checking the boxes off just to get the thing to say she did it, she's not necessarily there for the right reason. That's one half of it. And then the other half is that she's like completely unprepared
Yes.
for what she signed up for. So there's the dynamic of these two women and the fact that they are in this home and what they're dealing with, but then there's also Marion's experience throughout this whole story.
Yeah.
And like at first, like I'm closer in Marion's age, I feel like, than I am in these old women's in terms of like being discarded, right? Where I still feel when I go into nursing homes, which I volunteered in one for like 4 years, and it was a memory care unit.
Yeah.
And it takes a while to feel comfortable in those places. You do feel like the outsider. You do feel like, for me, this is just an hour in my afternoon. And it doesn't matter how many times you go, there's still the nice women and then the women that truly terrify you, right?
Yeah.
Not because they've done anything to you, but because they seem unhappy. And because they're unhappy, they seem like unpredictable. And they're taking a little bit of their anger out on you, maybe because they don't have any autonomy. And Marion just gets thrown to the wolves by this nurse, and
Yeah.
I think the nurse clocks her immediately. And I love that I underlined the sentence that you read where it said, "This decided the nurse,"
Yes.
which is such an interesting arrangement for that sentence. But, the nurse had no plan. She just heard that someone was awake in that room and decided to let her in there instead of disturbing someone else. All of that just felt so familiar. When I volunteered, I would bring my cat, and it was just a therapy cat. And they would at first lead me to these individual rooms. And the people that worked on these floors knew everyone really well, and they could tell me whether or not these people were in any mood to see any kind of guest. And then once you see them week after week, you know yourself whether or not they're in any kind of mood to
Yeah.
pet your stupid cat. Yeah, it just felt so real. And it also feels like a sort of maybe like a milestone that you have to go through, like as a kid. I remember like going to my great grandma's nursing home and like making a comment afterwards. I was like, this place was weird. This place like smelled. I was like 10 and I was so confused and I got yelled at for making that comment, That made the whole thing that much more uncomfortable. Like apparently I didn't act correctly, but I had no preparation for what I was going in to
Oh,
see.
yeah.
It was truly, I remember being truly scared. And like my great grandmother like kissing me on the face and I was like, oh my, like what is happening? Like just
Yeah.
so out of it. And like nursing homes are scary places even for adults, especially depending on how well these people are cared for. So I was identifying, like I felt so bad for Marion. On the one hand, you want to kind of slap her because you're like, come on, why'd you bring these flowers? Like this is what this is for.
You
Like
get
you're
an
supposed
extra
to
point.
visit. Yeah. She's like, I'm getting points. It's like, right, but why do you think you were supposed to bring them? It's because these people don't get visitors and they do want to bullshit with you for a little bit. And this is part of it. Even if what they do with their 20 minutes is to complain, they're
Yeah.
getting something out of it.
She would have been better off bringing the Bible and just reading from it so that she
Right.
could get the
She
extra
had
points.
something to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some performance to put on.
Right. And that's the other half of the people that visit these places. They'll just go and do their performance and they'll play music or whatever, do bingo. And if half the people fall asleep, that's fine because you just gave them something to do for 2 hours in the afternoon, whatever. So
Yeah.
like I sympathize, like at first she seems like sort of unsympathetic, but if you think about it, you're like, this is really disorienting for that age. And then of course the other half of the story is these two women who are like foils for each other.
Yeah, I think we're naturally kind of inclined to think of this from Marion's point of view as like going
Yeah.
into this room. And the story is set up, we're outside with Marion, we go into the room with Marion. So we are kind of in her experience of it all. And so we kind of look at these two women from it, but we also kind of have to think of it from their point of view. I mean, they're so lonely. And then this girl comes in and the two of them respond in such different ways. Like the one is
Yeah.
just cantankerous and just like absolutely negates anything anybody says. Those are not pretty flowers and this kind of stuff. And the other one is very like, somebody's here. I need to like interact. I need something. I need something. And then both versions of that's like two versions of loneliness. And Marion recoils from both of them in a similar way. So she's got her own kind of like separation going on. Like she doesn't really want to be there. She doesn't really.
No.
So it's a good little triad, a little like three different entry points onto this like little conversation about loneliness, right?
Yeah, and I'd have to look and find like specific examples of it, but I kind of got the impression that the woman that, like you said, is the more inviting of the two, even though she's lonely, the one that's like, oh, we have a guest. Even she kind of like says a couple things to Marion that lets her know that she's clocked her too. That she knows that this is just another little girl that they're sending in. It's a visit of charity.
Yeah.
And she understands what's going on.
Oh, it's like last time someone came and read from the Bible with us, and that
Yeah.
was so wonderful.
Yeah.
It's like you could read that as a dig. It's kind of like that one was better. She was more prepared. She brought a Bible. It's not just recoiling in this chair from my advances.
Yeah.
But you did bring flowers, and they're so pretty.
And then Marion says at one point, I can't stay but a minute. I really can't. It's like, oh my God, Marion.
Are you going to get your 3 points?
Yeah, I blocked off this one paragraph from her name is Addie, but now that she's referred to here as the sick woman, there was a point in this story, and it was toward the end here. I forgot to like circle it where I was completely confused which woman was talking.
I had a similar point. I did not mark it, but yeah, there was a similar point where I was like, wait, which one is this?
Yeah, she's saying the sick woman, then she's saying the old woman, then it's she whispered, then it's
Yeah.
now Addie said the first old woman, and it's like, okay, no.
Yeah, we're losing track at a certain point. And I have to imagine like there's a reason she's just saying the woman and she's not giving them consistent kind of
Yeah.
references. So a little bit of confusion. I mean, Marion herself in the room, like there's a moment when she says, she literally, the two are having an exchange. And it's like one came last month to see us and the other one's like, did not, did so, read to us out of the Bible and we enjoyed it. Who enjoyed it? We enjoyed it. You enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. We all enjoyed it, Marion said, or said Marion without realizing that she had said a word. Like she's just like jumping in. Like, so there's a little, I feel like she's confused about what's happening. So that confusion is being reflected in like the way that
Yeah.
the women are melting into each other a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely like appropriate that way.
Yeah.
It's just at the point in time that I remember being confused, felt critical because this paragraph that I did mark off, I feel like is like the crux of the story. I'm gonna read it real quick. You can cut it out, but it says, "Hush," said the sick woman. "You never went to school. You never came and you never went. You never wear anything. Only here. You never were born. You don't know anything. Your head is empty. Your heart and hands and your old black purse are all empty. You showed it to me, and yet you talk, 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 talk all the time until I think I'm losing my mind. Who are you? You're a stranger, a perfect stranger. Don't you know you're a stranger? Is it possible that they have actually done a thing like this to anyone, sent them in a stranger to talk and rock and tell away her whole long rigmarole? Do they seriously suppose that I'll be able to keep it up day in, day out, night in, night out, living in the same room with a terrible old woman forever?" And this is the woman who's Addie, like laid up in bed, has been the cantankerous one the entire time. And she seems to be the only one that says anything of, she puts a really fine point on her displeasure in this little monologue, right? She's completely with it. At first, we think that she's out of it or she's like dissociating or she really is sick, like in the head or otherwise, and not having a good day or not having a good time in general. And then you hear this, and I think it's pretty clear that she's the only one that, if she is struggling, it's because she's eyes wide open to this situation and how
Yeah.
horrible it is. Yeah.
She's come to a breaking point in some respect with like this roommate she doesn't know and doesn't want to know,
Right.
who annoys her probably constantly because the roommate's like trying to make connections, like talking the way people do.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, stop, just leave me alone. She wants to kind of sit in her isolation, and the other
Yeah.
one doesn't want to leave her alone.
Yeah, and I would argue too, it doesn't even matter who this other woman is in the story or in this woman's room as a roommate, like that she would have this same reaction, you know?
That's her personality.
Yeah, just like that it doesn't matter who her roommate is.
Oh, yes.
She just doesn't want to be here.
If there was another one like her,
Maybe.
they could just both lay there in silence and they would be fine.
Yeah, and complain here and there and,
Yeah.
commiserate somehow. But like, as it is, it's just anyone that she feels isn't fully paying attention to what's happening and why it's sad. Like, how could you be anything but like grief stricken, knowing that you're just there to die and that they're sending people in as charity and they're little kids that don't want to be there? And then you could also argue that this woman that is a little more talkative and more inviting for Marion, she's also keenly aware. And she could be one of these like people that we refer to as being like toxic positivity or something. I feel like they've called it sometimes, where it's basically like everything happens for a reason and everything's okay. And well, what are you going to do about it? And on some level, the only way that you're able to feel positive about a situation so sad or dire is because you're ignoring some part of it and you're not facing it fully. And so this other woman might also be totally aware that if she pays too much attention to the negative or gives into it too much, that she'll be Addie laid up in bed. So Addie's over here like, oh, this woman's an idiot. She has no clue. And I'm sure this woman is like, if you make me look too hard at this, like I'll crumble and I won't recover. So I'm just gonna like plow ahead here, like act like everything's good and fine. Yeah, so it's like you said, they're lonely in similar ways and are or are not like inviting to Marion in different ways, but it's probably because they have like very different coping skills.
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be my takeaway eventually at the end of this episode, but because they're coming at it from the two different perspectives, I mean, that's what gives it strength, right?
Yeah, they're so different.
You can imagine a story where there's only one old woman and then we get like this sense of isolation where she can't connect with it. But having the two of them to like bounce off each other, like that's what's creating like a lot of the drama in the scene. That's what's creating it's letting the story explore a lot more angles
Right.
on what's happening between them all.
Yeah, that is a good takeaway to just have characters that are so different from each other. Like we talk about foils a lot, but occasionally it seems like, at least with some of the stuff maybe that we read in workshops, that if a character is a foil for another character, it's almost by accident. And other times we're criticizing amateur writing for not making characters different enough. Like if you didn't have the dialogue tags, would I know who is speaking?
Oh yeah.
Is their manner of speaking the same and maybe they're just saying something slightly different, you know? Like how different are they really? It's like if I was having a conversation with a parent, you would hope that you'd be able to tell who is who just based on their perspective and their word choice. And
Yeah.
here, because they're probably women of the same general age, they have to be like wildly different for us to appreciate that.
And I think that's like one thing that you should do in the story. Like, it's fine to try to be realistic to a
Yeah.
certain degree, but in reality, people are like the differences are more subtle. But if you're really exploring something with a story, like you're exploring a theme or trying to like really dig into an emotion or whatever this story is trying to accomplish, pushing the characters to be the most version of whatever they are, you know, the most isolated old, the most cantankerous old woman, the most kind of like needy old woman in the case of these two, then you get a higher degree of drama and a higher degree of being able to explore the theme or get at the emotions.
Right.
It would be bad advice to say dial it back.
Yeah, right. I don't know that we've ever said that, right?
That's
Make
true.
this less dramatic.
Who would give that advice? But like, I think the advice you would give is like, no, you want to push it. You want to push it bigger, make it bigger, make the emotions bigger, make the character crazier, make the character more, just more of what is already here.
Or like what like you had looked at a story of mine recently, and that was basically the advice was to like play up the conflict a little bit or invent a conflict. And that's just like so against my inclination. But that's what fiction is for.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how you make things matter, I think.
Or make people pay attention or
Yeah. Somebody walks into a room, you don't necessarily look up, but if they walk in the room jumping up and down and dancing or screaming, then you're going to look and pay attention.
right.
Not that everyone in your story has to scream.
No, because then the fine line for all the naysayers would be to make all of these interactions and characters believable.
I always find it annoying in theater when their character is angry and they scream. I'm like,
No,
people
they don't scream.
exhibit anger in so many different ways. Like, you do
Yeah,
not have to scream those lines to show
no.
me that your character is angry.
Yeah, I feel like the scarier anger is the quiet one.
Yeah.
Ugh. What did you think of the ending? I did not
I
know
was
what
gonna,
to
that
make of
was the
it.
exact words I was gonna use.
Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth. And I didn't look this one up either.
You got to it first. The way that I read it was just that Marion had to do this. And then she was in that room and it was like this crazy moment that she just wanted to get out of it. So she's not trying to reach out and connect with these women. She's just fulfilling a checklist. And so when she gets out of there, she's like, whew, that's over. And she gets to eat her apple and catch the bus. And it's just kind of like as if it never happened.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I didn't even really get that far. It was just kind of like, what was the significance of the apple or the fact that she like stowed it away? But yeah, I guess you're right in the sense that this is like her relief. She probably planned to have this apple, but she didn't realize how bad it was going to be until she went and did it. And then after she went and did it, like that apple was like that much better.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to, you could dig into the apple in some way as being
Yeah.
like a symbol or something. But
Because, like, if I was going to indulge, I'd go to, like, fast food. You know what I mean? And she's like, oh, a healthy apple. And I'm like,
yeah, but
interesting.
this is Eudora Welty. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know when
exactly.
this story is set.
I think I looked that up. This was published in 1941.
41? I don't think
Yeah.
even McDonald's was around by then.
What a shame. Well, when I was reading it the second time, I was like, I need to look up when this was written because so much of it felt modern.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't feel nearly 100 years old. This feels like something you could have today.
I mean, you go into a nursing home now, they'd all be watching TV, so they wouldn't have
Yeah.
to
No, but it is this lax where
yeah.
a nurse would be like, yeah, sure, here. Yeah, but it felt modern. It felt these old women feel like old women we'd be talking to now, you know?
Oh yeah.
They don't feel that different. Yeah, I guess you're right about the ending though, that if you do have to do a hard thing, there's always like that relief afterwards, and then everything feels like a little bit brighter. Like she literally runs out of the nursing home. She like escapes the claws of this woman and like rips her arm away and runs out. And once she's outside, she's like, "Oh, thank God." I guess my lingering question would be, and the point of this story is probably the fact that the story was written at all probably answers my question, but like I wonder if Marion reflects back on this or knew in the moment why she was scared, you know? Because like I said, when I went into a nursing home as a kid to see my great grandma, I was terrified, but I might not have been able to articulate why exactly a place like that was scary, except that
Yeah.
old people can be scary because they're nothing like you, and a lot of them are terrifying looking. I mean, like you can tell when someone's sick, you know?
Especially for younger people, I would
Yeah.
imagine, because it's so removed from your experience.
Right. These people don't look right. They don't necessarily act right, but they're also acting differently because they're of a generation so far removed from your own. They're so much older. And, you know, you might not be super tight with a grandparent to begin with, and then to see them surrounded by all these other people in an unfamiliar setting. Like, those are all the reasons why I remember being scared of like this interaction as a kid. But as an adult, volunteering is a different kind of scary, right? Because as soon as I leave, I get to go back to my car and I get to drive myself to where I want to go next. And,
That's
you
right.
know, like I have all this autonomy and freedom and, you know, you just feel like a sense of like anything is possible now. So we appreciate Marion's relief on that end, but I wonder, and I like I said, the story is probably written because if Marion is a real person and even if she's not, right? Like you would imagine that this character could reflect on this moment and realize why she was scared then and why she would still be scared now. And it's because this is for a lot of us our future. This idea of being
Yeah.
like kind of just thrown into a room with a stranger and finding ways to cope with what comes next, which is not an exciting thing. Do you want to reiterate your takeaway then?
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway is basically about how to create dynamics in your story is like
Okay.
finding the points around. I don't want to use the word extremes because you don't necessarily need to go to the extreme and push the dial all the way over, but you want to push it far. You want to push it off the beaten path. You want to find like, not you don't have to, but I think you can create some really powerful dynamics and really explore something by getting your characters to the edge. They have to be the kinds of characters who would do the thing that makes the drama. If you have like a character who represents isolation, like the
Yeah.
woman in the bed here, but they're just a mild-mannered kind of like gentle person, then you're not going to get what you get out of the cantankerous, like truly isolated, doesn't give a crap anymore, is just going to say what they want. Like that you're going to get more out of than you're going to get out of the quiet version of that. So finding the characters that kind of represent the opposites of things and stuff so you can really circle in and explore what you're actually looking at with your theme of your story. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And multiple positions. Like
Sure.
this one has three. Like even Marion is part of the triangle. But you could also, if you can come up with another one, maybe there's four. Like having more points of view on the whatever the central idea is,
Right.
that helps.
I guess like my takeaway maybe isn't a good one, except I remember getting feedback from a workshop that I took once. And I think it's sometimes hard to get like concrete feedback. And I know I've mentioned it before, but the professor was talking about putting extra emphasis on animals and kids in stories because they're often overlooked or like stereotyped almost, you know?
Oh yeah.
So paying a little more attention to those types of characters, and I would argue you could throw certain senior citizens into that mix because they are stereotyped a lot, especially for writers our age. I imagine the older I get, the more convincing my writing will be for an older audience. The same way like people maybe don't want to read Kristen Rupinian's Cat Person. Like it might be like on point, but it's far removed from their experience in age at least. And I felt like this was just a good maybe challenge that you could take to include a senior in your story. It sounds like like a government initiative or something, but like if you know, we've all read the stories too where there's the old townskeeper or like shop owner and she's old and she has two lines and she calls you honey and it's like, come on.
Yeah.
That might be how they act, but this I felt like was one of the few stories that I feel like we've read in a long time. I don't know that I could name another that gave two women, old women, all the speaking lines.
Oh yeah.
And they they felt real and whole, and there were two different ones. We could tell the difference.
Yeah.
And we feel like we know them now. And I just don't know other pieces like it.
The only thing that comes to my mind is that Flannery O'Connor story where the grandmother gets her whole family killed.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that one.
Her choices kind of drive that one.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And that story had people like of several generations too, which is
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe there's options. But yeah, I honestly can't remember a story like this where, and it passes like the Bechdel test, right? Where three women are on a page, but they're not talking about men, they're talking about aging. That
Yeah.
feels rare too. And I would even put this Marion in the category of like children, right? She might be 14, but it feels like she's a real character here too. She's not a stereotyped kid somehow. She could have been,
Yeah.
a snotty teen or something. We've seen that a million fucking times. And instead
Yeah.
she's wholly unprepared and like really uncomfortable and all that.
Yeah, the unpreparedness is a good feature of children that don't necessarily see often.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of my takeaway. If you can come up with a story to write about characters of this age specifically, or the next time you include one, to just pay a little more attention to them.
Yep. I think our takeaways are basically DEI.
Yes. All right. Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed this episode, consider joining our Patreon. Your support helps us keep the show running. Find out more at patreon.com/whyisthisgoodpodcast. And for industry news, writing tips, and great short fiction, join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Naples Writers Workshop. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter at napleswritersworkshop.com.